This video was brought to you by Too Long. That's the official TLDR newspaper that we've made and which is available to purchase right now. Germans really don't like debt. And that's evidenced by the fact that for a decade after Angela Merkel enshrined the debt brake into the German constitution in 2009, Germany was basically the only European country to run consistently balanced budgets, despite the fact that Germany could borrow at literally negative interest rates. German politicians even came up with a sort of mythological anti-debt symbol, the Schwarze Null, or Black Zero, to represent zero borrowing. And in what might be the most German thing ever, there's even a Black Zero sculpture in Hesse's state finance ministry. And this is how staffers said goodbye to Merkel's finance minister in 2017. However, it looks like Germany might be finally falling out of love with the debt brake. Last week, Germany's Constitutional Court ruled that the government's proposed €60 billion climate fund was inconsistent with the debt brake and therefore illegal. And this has started an internal feud between the fiscally conservative FDP and their coalition partners over spending levels. And the government has now suspended a vote on the budget indefinitely, creating a risk of government shutdown. So in this video, we're going to explain Germany's infamous debt brake, why this was always a risk for the coalition, and what might happen next.
Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos.
So, what is Germany's so-called debt brake? Well, the debt brake is a constitutional law in Germany which limits the federal government's structural deficit to 0.35% of GDP per year and effectively prohibits Germany's 16 federal states from running any deficits at all. Now, it does have an emergency clause, which was triggered during the pandemic and when energy prices spiked after Putin's invasion of Ukraine. But in so-called normal times, it's really quite restrictive. And to truly appreciate this, you need to look at the sort of deficits that other similar countries are running. France and the UK both ran deficits of about 5% in 2022, while the US deficit is set to balloon to 7% in the coming years. And none of these countries have run deficits below 0.35% since the early 2000s. And the last time that France ran a budget deficit anywhere near that, let alone a surplus, was way back in the 70s. Anyway, Merkel created the debt brake in 2009, largely as a reaction to the Eurozone crisis. Two big spending packages and a €500 billion bank bailout have pushed Germany's debt-to-GDP ratio up to 81%, well above the 60% limit set in the 1992 Maastricht Treaty, the founding treaty of the European Union. And at the time, the debt brake enjoyed cross-party support and was widely perceived as proof that Germany's economy had outgrown its post-reunification profligacy. While some economists did warn that it would be too restrictive, for the first few years the debt brake seemed like it was working brilliantly well. Under Merkel, Germany was the only large European country to consistently achieve balanced budgets, and by 2019 its debt-to-GDP ratio had dropped to 60%. Much of Germany attributed Germany's economic success in the 2010s to its balanced budgets, and the debt brake took on sort of a mythological status within German politics, exemplified by the obsession with the Schwarze Null that we mentioned in the intro. Now, as we also mentioned, the debt brake was suspended for the first time during the pandemic, when Merkel's government authorized roughly €150 billion of extra spending to help the German economy survive lockdown. However, when Scholz replaced Merkel in late 2021 and the pandemic was receding, he noticed that about €60 billion hadn't been used. So, in his coalition agreement, he said that he'd redirect this money to a climate and transformation fund to finance the government's energy transition policies, arguing that these investments could still be considered pandemic adjacent because they'd help the country overcome the pandemic-related economic difficulties. However, the main opposition party, the Christian Democrats, didn't buy this argument. So in early 2022, they brought a case to the German Constitutional Court, arguing that these weren't really pandemic funds, and thus violated the debt brake. And just last week, after nearly 2 years, the court finally ruled in favour of the Christian Democrats that this redirection of funds was indeed a violation of the debt brake. Now, to be clear, this doesn't mean that all climate-related borrowing is unconstitutional. On the contrary, previous court filings suggest that the court is very open to extra borrowing for climate measures, and the rest of the money in the climate fund is just fine. Nonetheless, it has thrown a real spanner into the works for the immediate financing of the upcoming budget. And on Wednesday evening, the German government even announced that they'd be indefinitely suspending the parliamentary vote on the 2024 budget. Now, at the time of writing, it looks like the government's plan here is to essentially resuspend the debt brake retroactively for 2023, so that the previous climate spending can be considered legal. But even if they manage to do that, it remains unclear how they're going to get a budget sorted for next year. A co-leader of the SPD has already called for the debt brake to be lifted in 2024, and an SPD policy paper dismissed the debt brake as inappropriate for the challenges of the future. But this isn't going down well with their coalition partners over at the FDP. The retroactive suspension was already deeply embarrassing for FDP leader and finance minister Christian Lindner, who made a big deal of the fact that he reinstated the debt brake a few months ago and promised voters that balanced budgets will be back on the horizon soon. The FDP's poll ratings have already declined by 5%. And on Thursday, disgruntled FDP members filed a petition requiring its party leadership poll its membership on whether or not it should withdraw from the coalition altogether. And even just retroactively suspending the debt brake, let alone suspending it for 2024 as well, will probably invite further legal challenges. Because, well, it's not clear that Germany is really in the sort of emergency situation that would justify its suspension. Scholz is also unable to scrap the emergency debt brake entirely because, as a constitutional law, its removal would require a 2/3 majority in the Bundestag, which just isn't going to happen. And all of this points to a wider problem for Germany. The debt brake is going to make things really, really difficult for future German governments if Germany's economy slows significantly, as seems to be the case. This is both for global reasons, including the end of cheap Russian gas and the rise in protectionism, but also because, ironically, the debt brake encouraged chronic underinvestment in Germany's productive infrastructure. German public investment as a percentage of GDP has been far lower than its European peers for the last decade or so, and this is hurting productivity. Germany's road and rail services are nowhere near as good as the international cliches might suggest. 1 in 8 of its 40,000 bridges are no longer in adequate condition, and last year, 1 in every 3 German trains arrived late. The point we're making is that while Germany could, in some sense, afford the debt brake when the economy was booming, things are going to be a lot more difficult in the coming years.
If you want more from TLDR and want to support our journalism, then consider picking up a copy of our newspaper, Too Long. This is a one-off physical newspaper that we've been working on for the last few months, and which contains 32 pages full of analysis and explainers from the TLDR team on everything from Ukraine and Gaza to the state of the French and German governments or the upcoming elections in the UK, US, and around the world. It's not just us either. We also have a full interview with the creator and journalist Johnny Harris that people who buy the newspaper can also watch via a special QR code. There's also articles from a ton of other creators, including JJ McCullough, Search Party, Sophia Smith-Gala, and many more. This has been a really exciting project for us to work on, and hopefully you can already see the work that we've put into it, even into a TLDR-themed crossword. So if you want to pick up a copy and want to fund our journalism on YouTube as we head into 2024, then the link to the store is in the description. Plus, you can get 20% off your purchase this week only by using the code TLDREU at checkout. And with a limited quantity available, if you do want one, I'd order one soon, especially if you want it before Christmas. As always, thank you so much for your support, and I hope you like this silly but genuinely good project as much as we do. Thank you.